Amanda, your experience would have driven so many people to drink or depression or drugs or suicide. The more I read about your case, the more amazed I am that you had the mental strength to come through it. How did you do that?
I greatly appreciate that, Dan, and thank you so much for having me on here and the opportunity to share my story. I think that I've always had the kind of character of tackling trauma and an injustice head on. And a large part of, like, one of the greatest traumas has been having my identity stolen in the courtroom and in the media. And I've tried to battle that by putting out my own compassionate and nuanced journalism based upon my own perspective of having been turned into a cardboard cutout of a character. I have a podcast called Labyrinths where I try to do what I did not see in the unethical, bad storytelling that was done about this case. And I try to commit to doing the opposite of how I was treated.
The thing that's so shocking and terrifying for me, and I think for anyone, is that the police seemed to decide very early on that you were the person who they wanted to nail for this crime because they didn't think that you emotionally reacted in the correct way over your friend being murdered. And of course, there are a multitude of reasons for that, aren't there? I mean, this was a woman who you lived with. I presume you were in huge amounts of shock. Can you just explain a little bit about what advice you would give to people who might find themselves in a similar situation?
Well, that's an interesting question because it sort of puts it on the person who might get wrongly convicted, right? And I think that interest
Which is wrong, and I get that's wrong.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I think the one major difference between my reaction and my other roommates' reaction, say, there were two roommates who discovered the crime scene, was that one of us saw into Meredith's bedroom and the other did not. I did not see Meredith's body. I did not see the bloody crime scene. And so I did not react in the same way as my other roommate. All that said, I've spent a long time unpacking how I've blamed myself for the situation, and I've a little bit internalized the way that the world has sort of blamed me for the suspicion that landed on me. But I finally arrived at a place where I realized that of all the people in this situation who are making choices, bad choices, I was the one whose bad choices counted the least. And if anything, it's the police and the prosecution who should have followed the evidence instead of pursuing a case regardless of the evidence.
Well, look, it was disgusting the way they acted. I mean, you actually provided them the name of the killer very early on, but they were so desperate to nail you, they didn't follow the evidence. I mean, that is despicable. But I think one thing that you find very difficult, although tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it's the fact that your name is still more associated with the murder of Meredith Kircher rather than Rudy Guede, who is the killer.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that. It's been a long time that I've been trying to point that out to people, that if you really, really care about what happened to Meredith, then we need to address the actual killer. And the way that this story spiraled out of control and became a morality tale about female sexuality, totally erasing the young man who committed this rape and murder of a young woman, like, it is an incredible injustice, not just to Meredith's family and Meredith's memory, but also to everyone else who got pulled into that story, including me. And, it matters what we call a thing. It matters that there are all these, TV shows and books and movies coming out that are one version or another of the prosecution's narrative of girl-on-girl violence, when that is an actual misrepresentation of the realities of violence against women. So, if anything, I really appreciate you naming Meredith's killer, because Rudy Guede should not, I should not carry the burden of his crimes.
No, you shouldn't. And what's particularly despicable is he was actually sentenced to less jail time, far less jail time than you initially were. And he's been released. He's been released, Amanda, early from jail just 2 weeks ago. And I'm sorry to bring this up because it must be difficult for you. But yet again, he is trying to point the finger at you, saying in a recent interview with The Sun, I've got blood on my hands because I tried to save her, not kill her. I mean, he's lying, and his lie is being carried again all around the world. And again, he is trying to smear your reputation. Do you want to respond to him?
You know, I don't think that he is. I reacted to his release from prison in a podcast episode for Labyrinths, in which I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I tried to give him I had hoped that he had at the very least rehabilitated in this time period. And what I have found is that because the prosecution and the police chose not to charge him and find him fully responsible for this crime and pursue a case against him that let him off the hook for the sake of advancing a prosecution against two innocent people, they let him know that he doesn't have to take responsibility for his actions and that he can continue to exploit the public's and the criminal justice system's fascination with me for his own benefit. And so I think that yet another insane injustice about this case is this sense of not closure. The fact that Rudy Guede was never actually found fully responsible for Meredith's crime simply because the prosecution decided to let him off the hook for the sake of pursuing a case against innocent people.
No, it's completely wrong. And I think what he said was really despicable. I know it's very painful for you, Amanda, that you still haven't had a reconciliation with the family of Meredith Kircher. You want to be able to visit her grave because, of course, she was a friend of yours and you were never able to properly grieve, I imagine, for her. Why do you think the Kircher family has been reluctant to have that conversation with you, given that they must now know that you are completely innocent?
Well, again, I don't want to speculate or sort of give voice to what's in their hearts and minds, because I also understand that this is the most traumatic experience of their life, and that they were told a story at the very beginning when they were the most vulnerable that the guilty person was me. And so the first sort of sense of closure and understanding that they received, that is potentially the only good feeling that they can feel about this terrible tragedy, is that there's a name and a face to it. And so I understand how the criminal justice system in Italy failed them. And it failed them in a big way because it gave them this sense of doubt, even about what the truth is and what justice should be. So if I put myself in their shoes, I understand. And I don't want to put them in a position where they feel like they have to respond to me, because they don't. This is their pain. It's deep, it's real, and it's more than mine. So I just feel like I want them to know that I think we could achieve a lot of healing and support for each other if we found a way to reconcile and to find our common grief through this immense tragedy.
Well, I hope they're watching, because I think if they did, they would understand why that would be so important to you. Look, Amanda, you have spoken about wanting to reclaim your narrative, and I think this is something that's really interesting, actually. I've spoken about it on the show a lot with a number of high-profile women who have become the centre of a media storm and feel like they've lost control of who they are. So Monica Lewinsky, Carol Baskin of the Tiger King, Sarah Palin, even, the former vice presidential candidate. For you, you've been able to do it. I mean, you're a mum. You're happily married. You work on the Innocence for the Innocence Project at times to try and help people in a similar situation to you. Do you feel like people are starting to understand the real Amanda Knox finally?
That's an interesting question. Being on the show and being welcomed by you to be here and tell my story gives me a feeling like, yeah, maybe that's the case. It's definitely felt like it's been a long, long work in progress of trying to claw myself out of a grave of public opinion. And it's true. Like the concept of people being guilty before proven innocent in 2011 is it's been a long time coming, and I think it's getting potentially worse because we find ourselves allying in really like black and white thinking. So I feel like we are arriving at a place where we're reconsidering these black and white stories that have been fed to us by the media for a long time. But at the same time, Carol Baskin was, a year ago that people were gleefully going out in the streets, like doing dance moves to a song about her being guilty of the murder of her husband. So I think that we need to be careful. We need to be mindful of when and how we are judging other human beings and recognizing their humanity, despite the fact that there's an easy narrative that's placed right in front of us.